Hello, Mzansi. Welcome to another helpful and informative episode of Food for Mzansi TV. My name is Duncan Masiwa, journalist at Food for Mzansi, and it is great to be with you all on this amazing platform. Now, today we zoom into a topic that's been in the headlines for quite some time now. For those of you who recall, a year ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that by July this year, South African businesses would be required to put necessary measures in place to become more compliant with the new Protection of Personal Information Act, which is, of course, better known as the POPI Act. Now, here to help us better understand the Act and what it means for farmers, we're joined by Mr. John Giles, who is the Director and Managing Attorney at Michalsons, a law firm that specializes in the POPI Act. Mr. John, welcome to Food for Mzansi TV.
Thanks very much, Duncan. It's great to be with you and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Now, I'd like to jump straight into it. Our viewers heard at the beginning, that we're discussing the POPI Act. But in all honesty, it sounds also complex. In plain English, break it down for us. What is the Act and what is the purpose of it all?
Essentially, it says that if you process personal information, you need to protect that information in order to protect people from harm. So in essence, it's not saying you can't process personal information. It just says that if you are going to, there's some conditions you need to comply with in order to do it lawfully. And I think maybe the best way of illustrating this is actually to look at a few examples, because it's a good way of understanding why this is an important issue. So imagine a scenario where a farm worker on a Saturday morning goes into town and wants to buy a couch from a furniture store. And they want to buy it on credit, and they find the couch and they start going through the process. And the store then says to them, sorry, I'm not prepared to lend you the money or to give you the credit to buy the couch because you're not credit worthy. Or it could be that someone has actually stolen that employee's identity and has already incurred a whole lot of credit in that person's name, which then prevents them from accessing further credit. So it means they can't buy the couch. Or the information about that person has got back to the store through different scenarios and results in them not being able to buy the couch. And that's exactly what the POPI Act's all about. It's trying to make sure that farm worker isn't unfairly prejudiced or excluded from an economic market or from being able to buy the couch. I think another good example is a farm worker gets an SMS which says you've won 1,000 rands worth of airtime. All you have to do is buy 100 rands worth of airtime and you get the 1,000 rands worth of airtime free. So the poor farm worker then pays the 100 rand thinking they're going to get 1,000 rands worth of airtime, and instead they just lose their 100 rand. They've paid it to a criminal. And in that scenario, criminals use personal information in order to scam people. And often it's the poorest people in South Africa who get scammed out of their last 100 rand. And it's because people didn't protect their personal information, and it enabled a criminal to then commit that crime against them. So it's really in a farming context, it's often the farmer or the employer who needs to protect the personal information of that employee so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And that's how they protect them from harm.
I love that. And what I'm getting from this, it sounds like, the Act is there to protect, you as an individual or as a company or as a farmer. And, we talked about the Act dealing with the protection of personal information. What kind of personal information, are we talking about?
So it's any information that identifies a person. So the typical examples would be name, ID number, telephone number, email address, bank account number. But it goes broader than that. It's also things like your race, your preferences, your financial history are all examples. And I think so. A good example there is if we think of, now we're not thinking of a farm worker, we're talking about a farmer. A farmer goes to a bank and says, look, I need to borrow some money. I need some money. And the bank says, no, no, I'm not prepared to lend you the money because I know that the land that you have has a very poor yield because I got data from lots of different sources. I've profiled you, and I'm afraid I'm not prepared to lend you the money. That's another classic example where the farmer is actually the data subject now. And the farmer is the person who could be discriminated against or prejudiced based on their personal information. And it's another good example of how it could apply.
You definitely clearly outlining it for us, as those that are working in the agricultural sector. What should farmers, in the agricultural sector know about the POPI Act?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because there is so much to it. But I think if we look at farmers, it's always important to consider, are you large, medium, or small? Because the impact is different in those contexts. And what a small farmer needs to do is a lot less than what a large farmer needs to do.
Ah,
But really, if you think of a farmer, farmers don't process a lot of personal data. They're not like a bank or a healthcare provider. Where the biggest impact is that a farmer often has a lot of farm workers, lots of employees, and they've got their personal information. They've got their employees. Often it's personal details, but often it's health related information. Often it'll also be their bank account details because they've got to pay those people. And so for farmers, the biggest impact is really protecting the personal data of their employees. I mean, another great example is farmers might pay farm workers and give them a pay slip. And pay slips are like gold to criminals because if I can get hold of someone's pay slip, I can go and get a fast little loan. I can go and buy furniture. It's one of the key components of stealing someone's identity. So the farmer needs to be thinking, well, how do I give people their pay slips? How do I know that it's getting to the right person and somebody else can't intercept it and take the pay slip on the way?
yeah. And now, of course, we've seen, farmers becoming quite innovative in the last couple of years. They market and sell their services through WhatsApp groups, email newsletters, and even Facebook groups. With the new POPI Act, what are the do's and don'ts that farmers should be aware of?
Yeah, so if farmers, for example, are selling to a retailer, then there's very little impact on that side. There's on the farm worker side, but very little on the customer side, as it were. But the more that farmers start interacting with other people, with consumers directly, then yes, there's definitely an impact because what the POPI Act's trying to stop is really people being a nuisance and trying to sell their things. So, for example, what the POPI Act says is that I can SMS you only if you're a customer of mine on an opt-out basis. So if you've bought a cabbage from me before, I can WhatsApp you or SMS you or email you to say, hey, I've got some more cabbages. Would you like one? But I must let you opt out of that communication. And then if I don't know you at all, but I think you really want to like my cabbages, I can only email, WhatsApp, or email you once to say, can I start communicating with you to sell you cabbages? So they need to opt in first. And once they have, you need to give them an opportunity to opt out every time after that. So it's it's different rules depending on whether somebody is already a customer of yours versus a prospect, somebody you don't know at all.
Yeah, that's quite important. So if a farmer approaches a new market or a new customer, they first have to give that customer, the opt-in. Can I send you communication? Can I market my produce to you? Is that what it is that you're communicating?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk non-compliance. What are the consequences of not being POPI Act compliant?
So for me, the biggest consequence is your stakeholders losing trust in you as an organization. For example, if your farm workers don't trust that you're going to look after their personal data and protect them from identity theft and and scams, they're going to want to work for another farmer who does look after them. So that's an example. And then also, if you are if you're being a nuisance to people by spamming them with communications, they're going to get annoyed and they're going to stop buying from you. So you're going to lose customers. And I think for me, that's the biggest risk. It's also could be that if you are unlawfully processing personal data and just being reckless about it, you might not get loans or shareholders or might leave. And that's the biggie. The other ones are there's a possibility of being fined by the information regulator, and that's up to 10 million Rand. I think particularly there, the risk is around account numbers. If you don't protect account numbers of your employees or suppliers, then you could be fined there. I think it's very unlikely that anyone will go to jail. Very, very unlikely. So that's almost off the table. We're seeing at the moment in South Africa in current affairs how difficult it is to get somebody in jail. And I think is a similar scenario in data protection. It's very unlikely someone's going to go to jail.
Yeah.
And then there's the possibility that data subjects could sue you. So, for example, if the farm worker's identity is stolen and as a result, they or you as the farmer don't protect. Sorry about that. If you as the farmer don't protect their personal information, a criminal gets that information and is able to scam them out of all their money, then the farm worker could claim damages from you as the farmer, and you'd have to pay back to the farm worker the money they lost.
Yeah.
So that's another consequence of non-compliance.
You mentioned an amount of up to 10 million Rand. Does that depend on what scale the farmer is? If I'm a small scale farmer, will I be liable to that, that kind of money, or does it depend on the scale of the business?
Yeah, so there's certain minor offenses which are up to 1 million Rand, and then there's some major offenses which are up to 10 million, and it's up to. So the regulator is definitely going to have a look at it and say, sure, this is a small scale farmer. I could fine you up to 10 million, but I'm actually going to fine you 20,000 Rand. And that certainly is going to happen. But there are actually very few criminal offenses. It's big things like I mentioned the failing to protect account numbers. But then on a smaller scale, it's things like if you need to get prior authorization from the regulator and you don't, it's a criminal offense up to 1 million Rands worth of a fine. But farmers don't need to get prior authorization. And maybe that's an important thing just to touch on. There's a lot of noise about information officers, and every farmer, every single body has an information officer by default, and it's really the head of your body. If you're a CC or a company, it would be the managing member, or it would be the director, the MD, just whoever's the head is the default. And that person needs to be registered with the information regulator. And then there's a very small group of people who need to get prior authorization. And I don't think any farmer would need to get prior authorization. So really the only practical thing at the moment would be to register your information officer.
Yeah. What's your final word of advice, to farmers that are watching?
I think it's to realize that most of what you hear and what you read on the internet is not intended for you. Most of what's there is intended for organizations that there's a high impact on them and large organizations. So it's a bank, for example, that lots of what's written is there. So my final word is don't panic. Don't let this issue stress you out. You've got a hard enough time as it is running a farm and just farming. There's so many things to consider. This is a minor issue compared to everything else. It is important, and you want to be protecting any personal information that you process, but in order to protect people from harm. But really, deal with some of the important things, but don't let it stress you out. Don't panic. You're not going to go to jail. And to a large extent, it's common sense. Just keep thinking in your context and put yourself in their position. So would you like to get the SMS you're about to send to 1,000 people offering you cabbages? Would you be interested? And so test it that way. If you were a farm worker, would you be happy if your employer did that with your personal information? If you feel you wouldn't be happy, then you shouldn't do it. It's easy.
Yeah. I can tell you, John, you've definitely given us some much relief as, as an agricultural industry. Right, farmers, there you have it. You know, John's final word advice brings us to the end of this episode. John, it was great having you with us today.
Yeah, great. It's good to chat to you, and yeah, hopefully I've managed to clarify the topic a little bit more and gives people some insights on what's important.
Yeah, definitely. Right from me, Duncan Masiwa, and the rest of the Food for Mzansi team. Have a great week. And remember, let's continue keeping each other safe during this COVID-19 pandemic. Have a great day. Bye bye.